This is Calvin from Defund the BBC. My guest today is the Democratic Unionist Party MP for East Antrim, Sammy Wilson. Welcome to Defund the BBC, Sammy.
And thank you very much, Calvin, for the invite. And I look forward to having a chat with you about a very important issue, and one which I think the government has to grasp very quickly.
Well, absolutely. So let's start right from the top with the spiciest question, because this week the BBC decided to call a dead IRA terrorist a veteran. What are the BBC thinking?
Well, I mean, the BBC has always had difficulty with the term terrorists, especially if they've been left-wing, associated with Islam or associated with republicanism. They're called in some cases, they've been called activists. They've been called lots of other names, but never the term terrorism seems. In fact, I remember writing to the BBC on this on one occasion, and they felt that it was that using the term terrorist was too pejorative, and therefore they would be seen to be biased towards a certain side. So therefore they look for all of these other euphemisms, which of course try to eradicate what the people who they're reporting about were actually trying to do, and that was to force people to accept their views through terror, hence the term terrorists. And
Absolutely.
you know, the death of the IRA terrorist that the BBC were reporting on this week in Londonderry, and his funeral, etc. He was actually shot by the army when he was engaged in an act of terror, along with two others who were killed in that incident. And yet, you know, the BBC, even though it was quite clear that he was involved in a violent activity and was caught red-handed in violent activity, the BBC still have to talk about it in these anaesthetised terms. Though I think that, of course, having lived through the Troubles in Northern Ireland, that reflects the pro-Republican views which have always been embedded in the BBC, and I'm sure we'll talk about BBC bias later on.
Yeah, no, I agree, because they have issued an apology, but even the apology, so I'll read it out. We understand the sensitivities around Troubles, issues and legacies, including in relation to terminology. Much of this can be contested. What does that mean? Much of this can be contested. Is that even an apology?
No, it's not an apology. In fact, it's the BBC giving their view of the past in Northern Ireland, where they now equate the security forces with terrorists. And I mean, they've done this so many times in the reports. The state is almost as, in fact, in some cases, you think, given the amount of coverage that they give to inquiries into state activities, the state is actually worse than terrorists. And it's all part, I think, of the left-wing narrative and the pro-Republican narrative within the BBC to try and aid and assist those who want to rewrite the history of the Troubles, namely that those who engaged in active terror were victims, and those who sought to stop them carrying out their terror against the population were somehow or other the perpetrators of all of the Troubles. And you know, given that in Northern Ireland especially there are tens of thousands of people who served gallantly in the RUC, the UDR, the Army, the prison service, all of whom, indeed even people who worked for the security forces. We're remembering this week the people who were killed coming home from working for the security force base at T-Ban, blowing up in their minibus. They were regarded as legitimate targets because they worked for the security forces. All of those people and their families feel really angry at the way in which the BBC tries to whitewash the bloody activities of those who engaged in 35 years of terrorism in Northern Ireland and were responsible for over 3,000 deaths.
Yeah, and rightly so. I think it's disgusting. Is this just another example of the British Broadcasting Corporation thinking that British is a bit of a dirty word?
Well, of course, I think that there is almost a shame to be British. I call it the Bias Broadcasting Corporation because I don't think there's anything British about it. And you know, when you think of the people who dominate the BBC now, the almost the unconscious bias that there is towards their own country. You look at the way during the whole Brexit debate as well. I mean, the BBC was almost like a broadcasting organisation for the European Union rather than for the British point of view and the British electorate's point of view. I think that there is almost an embarrassment. You know, this is old-fashioned. We're internationalists now. We don't belong to any country. We belong to a federation of countries, etc. And that's the kind of modern view which the BBC thinks they should be perpetuating, whereas most people are proud of the country to which they belong, and rightly so. And I think the BBC tries to educate that out of us or brainwash it out of us.
I think you're right. So I want to ask, on the topic of Brexit, how are you finding the coverage of things like the problems due to the Northern Ireland Protocol on BBC Northern Ireland? How are these portrayed in comparison to the rest of the UK?
Well, I mean, the BBC love it. And all of the problems which have arisen from the protocol, I mean, I do think that the British government treated Northern Ireland disgracefully when it agreed to the withdrawal agreement, and especially the Northern Ireland Protocol. But, you know, the BBC have used it as almost an after the match commentary. We told you so. Nothing good would come from this. Brexit was wrong, and this is the result. They almost, I think gleefully, they report the difficulties which are being caused by the Northern Ireland Protocol. And there are difficulties, there are huge difficulties. I mean, despite what the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister and everything else has said, there has been a border drawn between Northern Ireland and the rest of the country to which we belong. That border is having a significant impact on people's lives on a day-to-day basis. It's having an impact on businesses. And I think we're only beginning to feel the impact of it. And the European Union is determined that it will stay that way. But the BBC, rather than simply reporting that this is what has happened, and look for, you know, commentary on what could be done to change it, it's always the emphasis. This is what Brexit has brought about. So I mean, I think that they're glad that this has happened, because it allows those within the BBC who wish to continue the battle, the Brexit battle, to say we were right, you were wrong.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, you know, we've been reading in the papers recently about threats to the union. How much do you think the BBC's anti-union and anti-British bias plays into these recent poll figures?
Well, I mean, I think that, first of all, you only have to look at the prominence that the BBC gives to all of the anti-unionist voices in the United Kingdom. I mean, you would think at times, when I listen to the news and see the coverage which BBC give, sometimes you think, is Nicola Sturgeon the Prime Minister? You know, because every word that she says, everything that happens in Scotland, and by the way, I never hear BBC, maybe they do it in Scotland, I never hear BBC talk about the appalling record of the SNP when it comes to education in Scotland, or policing in Scotland, or local government finance in Scotland, or indeed the way in which the Scottish economy has declined. I never hear any of that. And you know, maybe they do it in Scotland, but you know, I've yet to hear when Nicola Sturgeon has been interviewed nationally by BBC interviewers that her record in Scotland is ever challenged. In fact, they usually give her and any other Scottish nationalist who wants to make the point an opportunity to rubbish everything that's just done by the government of Westminster. Now, you know, maybe they feel it's too local. I don't know. But I'll tell you one thing, when bad things happen in Northern Ireland, they certainly get national coverage. So, you know, I do think that there's, to an extent, BBC has played along with this kind of nationalist narrative. And of course, it's the same in Northern Ireland as well, the prominence which they give to the nationalist point of view in Northern Ireland, and even the way they, let me give you another example, Calvin, even the way they've unquestionably accepted the interpretation of the Belfast Agreement and its application to the Northern Ireland Protocol. There's, I mean, you would think that the Belfast Agreement was all about the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. It's not mentioned in the Belfast Agreement. What is mentioned, and what is first and foremost and prominent in the very first page of the Belfast Agreement, is that Northern Ireland's status within the United Kingdom should not be changed unless there is a consent of the majority. Now, as far as the BBC are concerned, you'd think that that phrase was never in it.
Yeah.
It's always the nationalist narrative of the Belfast Agreement and the consequences that stem from that.
Well, this is interesting to me because where's this bias come from? Has it always been there, or is this new?
Well, I mean, I don't know. The BBC used to be held up as the kind of gold standard for public broadcasting. And, you know, Lord Reith, when the BBC was set up, set standards which, to me, have now been completely overthrown. And I suspect that this has been a long, slow decline where you get people into positions within the BBC who then realised how powerful an organisation it was, who recruited like-minded people. And yeah, I remember, I think it was Peter Sissons talked about the bias in the BBC. And he argued it wasn't a conscious bias. It wasn't that somebody sat down with a blueprint and said, here's our plan, this is how we're going to manipulate the news. He said it was more a case of, it was a mindset, I think was the term he used, that amongst the hierarchy within the BBC, there was a certain view of life. And that then perpetuated. And he gave an example one time. He said, you know, I remember going to the director and saying, give me some background in this story I'm going to report. And he threw him a copy of The Guardian and said, you'll find it in that. And he saw that as the kind of mindset. If you wanted a view of a story, then you got it in The Guardian, because that's, of course, where we all get our views, isn't it? And that's the kind of angle that we want to have in the news stories that we report.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's almost a groupthink mentality, isn't it? They've just recruited, well, I say recruited, Ken McKerry. He was the former BBC director for Nations and Regions. He's now been appointed as, and this is a job title under half, Executive Sponsor Safeguarding Impartiality. And he's being paid £325,000 a year to monitor whether or not the BBC is biased. He's got his work cut out for him, hasn't he?
Calvin, I remember when that appointment was first made, I did some interviews on it here in Northern Ireland, and pointed out that here was a man who was going to be earning twice what the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom earns to investigate bias within the BBC.
Yeah.
And so a constituent tweeted back and he said, what do they need somebody, why do they need to pay somebody £375,000 a year to find whether there's bias in the BBC? Sure, it's dead obvious that there's bias in the BBC. You only have to look what some of the reporters have said, some of their senior people who have left have said about the bias in the BBC. So you don't need somebody to investigate. The irony, of course, is that when the BBC, and I remember, I think it was back in about 2010, it was claimed there was an anti-Israeli bias in the BBC. They conducted a report into it. The report obviously found that there was significant bias, and they then spent £200,000 burying that report and would not release the findings of it. So I think that if bias is found, you may well find that we never get to know about it, unless, of course, it was that they feel it's biased against some of the favoured groups that the hierarchy of the BBC wish to promote. I have no doubt we'll hear all about that, but when it comes to anti-British bias, anti-unionist bias, climate change bias, Brexit bias, whatever, I guarantee he'll either not discover any, or if he does, we'll not hear too much about it anyway.
Well,
but
indeed.
I think, and you hit an important point there. The eye-watering salaries which the BBC can afford to pay to people in roles which many of the public would say are pointless, you don't have any need for anyway. But of course, when you're extracting money by force and by threat of criminal conviction from the general population and extracting thousands of millions of pounds every year from them, then of course you can afford to pay those kind of salaries, can't you?
Well, that's the thing. You've hit on two really good points there, because yes, that's a lot of money to pay someone to not find any bias. Call me a cynic, but if you're paying someone £325,000, it's in his vested interests to not find any biases. But also, I think I'm correct in saying that Northern Ireland leads the way in prosecutions for non-payment of the licence fee. So 14 in a day in court, 3,700 people last year. That's £225,000 in fines imposed on the normal people of Northern Ireland, and 23 people were sent to prison. This is madness, isn't it? We're paying this guy's salary to essentially keep the BBC biased, and we're prosecuting normal, everyday Northern Irish folk and people all around the rest of the UK to do it.
Yeah, in fact, they reckon now that 10% of court cases are taken up with cases dealing with non-payment of the licence fee. And those are criminal convictions, of course. And one of the reasons why the BBC has fought so hard, and again, unfortunately, the government appears to have given in on this, to have this removed as a criminal offence, is because they know there'll be a tsunami of people who wouldn't pay the licence fee if there wasn't the threat of a criminal conviction. And by the way, I really enjoyed the comments you made, and I acted in Northern Ireland. I cheered on the 1 million pensioners who are saying, put us in jail if you want, we're not paying your licence fee. And I think that, we probably do need more of a rebellion against the licence fee, and it'd be interesting to see whether the BBC now start pursuing pensioners and having lots of pensioners in prison, etc., for not paying licence fee. But it's significant what you say as well about that. I think the last figure I saw was that 7.5% of the money raised by the licence fee goes into either chasing people for the licence fee or prosecuting people for not paying the licence fee. Now, that's a significant proportion of. I think that in total the BBC gets about £4.5 billion from the licence fee at present. I think it's sort of somewhere around that. Well, 7.5% of that, is running into what, over £30 million being spent in collecting the money, the tax on people. I think that if you even look at it as a means of a method of funding an organisation, you've got to ask yourself, is that a sensible way of doing it?
Absolutely.
I guarantee that if you had that kind of, if that was the cost, for example, in my local council of collecting rates, people would begin to ask questions: is this an efficient way of raising money?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only that, they spent £100 million this year on diversity, and we've spent all this time talking about how diverse they aren't. So I don't know where the money's going. It's not being spent correctly, and they're forcing people to pay it, and that's the key, isn't it? If you don't pay it, you go to jail. I think we need to look at the remit there and make sure that BBC only covers BBC content and then not threatening people under prosecution. But Sammy Wilson, thank you so much for spending the time to talk to us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Calvin, thank you, and can I wish you all the best with your campaign, and I can assure you that we will continue to press the government as it comes to the review of the licence fee to look at a means other than the licence fee of having the BBC financed. And if it comes to a vote on scrapping the licence fee, we'll be the first into the yes lobby.
There you go. You heard it here first. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.